Last time we met, folks, we were talking about immigrants and their passage to America. These were new immigrants, right? These weren't your Irish and your Germans. So how were these new immigrants different from the old immigrants? For example, where were they coming from?
Europe.
Well, Europe, yes, but which parts of Europe? Because Irish and Germans are also European. So what parts of Europe? Southern, Eastern Europe. What kinds of countries are they coming from? Italy, Greece, Russia. Many of them are Jewish. And how are they different from the German immigrants?
They're poor.
Uneducated, they're poor, they're likely not going to assimilate, right? Many of them remain in their ethnic neighborhoods. Many of them became birds of passage who decided to go back home afterwards. So just be aware that this new type of immigrants is different from the old type of immigrants. We talked about them coming to America, passing Statue of Liberty, all that stuff, and how they would eventually be processed to where? Ellis Island. So just be familiar with Ellis Island is where they were processed when coming to America. So, when we were talking about these new immigrants, we talked about the different groups that they had to deal with. The first group were political machines, and the first political machine that we mentioned was this guy. This is who? This is Boss Tweed. This is a refresher. Boss Tweed made himself very, very powerful in New York. By the way, he's in New York City. And the reason he made himself very powerful is by making use of immigrants in America. What did he offer them? He said, I'll give you jobs, housing, food even, and in exchange for offering you all those things, all I ask in return is what? Your vote. So the immigrants would give Boss Tweed the vote. Now, wouldn't you vote for someone that gave you all these things anyway? Sure. So he was offering them something that they needed, but he in turn was getting their vote. And once he got their vote, he would use that to create a political machine, which is really much just, corruption in the city. So it's really just corruption is what that leads to. Because now, you're going to vote for my guy. My guy's now in charge, and he's going to steal tax money. He's going to give me contracts instead of giving it to you. So you can see a lot of corruption happening as a result of these political machines and Boss Tweed. Good so far? Okay. The next group of people that responded to these immigrants was the social gospel movement led by Walter Rauschenbusch. Just like it sounds. Walter Rauschenbusch. Pretty simple spelling. And Walter Rauschenbusch, who led the social gospel movement, believed in applying Christian values to social reform. So we should help the poor and these immigrants. Why? Christian morals. What would Jesus do? They wouldn't wear the bracelets back then, but still, the basic idea is there. We have to help these poor, these immigrants, because it's the right thing to do. So Walter Rauschenbusch promoted this idea of using Christian values for social reform. Pretty simple stuff, right? So, and the name is there, social gospel movement. So think gospel religion, social movement, social gospel movement is Christian religion applied. Walter Rauschenbusch is not a name that will often come up unless it's a document. Then you should already know his name and what they're talking about. Another way to help the immigrants coming to America was the settlement house movement. So when you have political machines taking advantage of them politically, you had the social gospel movement helping them in the cities. And you have another group known as the settlement house movement, led by Jane Addams and Florence Kelly. Can someone grab the lights in the back, please? It's the left light. Thank you. So the settlement house movement, other way around. Perfect. The settlement house movement was led by Jane Addams and Florence Kelly. And what would happen is that these two women, amongst all the other women that they led, would send middle-class women to ethnic neighborhoods. They would send middle-class women into ethnic neighborhoods or ethnic ghettos, and they would build or establish, or they would create settlement houses. So again, the settlement house movement was when Jane Addams and Florence Kelley, the first two in charge, they would encourage and convince middle-class women to go into ethnic ghettos and build these settlement houses. Pretty much the idea is they wanted well-off people to live in these communities. They wanted them to live there. And by living there, what they wanted to do was to provide social services. Because do these immigrant communities have a lot of needs? You want to turn off your phones, folks? Do these immigrant communities have a lot of needs? Definitely. They're new to America. They don't understand how social services in America works or what they can get. So these women decided they need our help. So some of the services that they offered included English instruction, especially for who? Children, yes, but children are going to public school. This is especially for adults. Because the kids are going to go to school no matter what. They're going to learn English. But adults, they were not getting any English instruction. So the settlement house movement, like Jane Addams and Florence Kelley, they would go into these towns and said, if you have some free time in the evening, come over to my house. I have a room set up with some desks and chairs. I'd love to teach you English. Does that make sense? So the idea is they're trying to help out these local communities. They'd also offer childcare. Why might they offer childcare, and why might that be helpful for these immigrant communities? Yeah, when they would go to work. Because oftentimes, might some parent not be able to work because they have kids at home? Especially when they're like toddlers or newborns, not old enough to work yet, like 4 or 5. So if their kids are under 4 or 5 and they have to stay at home, I as a parent can't go to work, which means, am I going to lose income? And is that income something I might desperately need? So they offered childcare, which was a huge boon and a huge help to these immigrant communities. They'd offer cultural activities, to make them more American. Like they teach them about July 4th and Thanksgiving, and so that way they're not, wondering why we explode stuff on July 4th, because that really doesn't make any sense if you think about the tradition. Like, oh, it's July 4th. All right, let's go blow things up. America. But we try to explain, these are like the rockets that were fired, and warfare helps commemorate the wars that we fought to get where we were. And so they teach all of these types of traditions. And they would establish local schools and businesses. They would help establish local schools and businesses. So, very helpful. They help provide a lot of services to those in need in the cities, or at least in the immigrant communities. Like I said, these two women are the most famous settlement house workers. Jane Addams is by far the most famous of them. And Jane Addams established her own settlement house in Chicago called Hull House in Chicago. If you go to Chicago today, you can still visit Hull House. It's still there. And Hull House was a settlement house in Chicago slums. By the way, and if you do go to Chicago today, the areas of the ethnic neighborhoods are still ethnic neighborhoods today. They're still like the Jewish district and the Italian district. You have that today in New York and LA also. Those districts still exist today. They're historic. They're just a little bit more blended. In any case, Hull House. What you should also know is that the settlement house movement, they were pretty much, all these settlement house workers were pretty much the first social workers. That's what they did, right? They're social workers. They would go in and help families in need, like child protective services, whatever else, but they're the first social workers. Eventually you can major in this, social work. Cool? Questions? Comments? You definitely should know Jane Addams and Hull House. Definitely should know them. Cool beans? Awesome. Here's some examples of the settlement house movement. Here they are teaching some kids. Teaching. Demonic children being taught. That's why you don't move. That's why you don't move when your picture's being taken. Because again, like, sit still. This will take like a minute. Like literally a minute. Not like...
Opposite.
So, yes, I know, demon eyes. Here they are teaching music, and I've told every year, this looks like my best friend. Like, I thought she traveled back in time and taught, and she also teaches music in New York. So I think she is a time traveler, but she looks exactly like my best friend. So shocking. Anyway, teaching. Anyway, so there are positive responses to all these immigrants, and then there are negative responses to immigrants. You'll see the rise of what again? Nativism. What are nativists?
Yeah,
They're already here in America, and they oppose immigration. Here's the ironic thing about the nativists of this time. Yeah, they were the Germans and the Irish. These were Germans, Irish, and English, so you kind of just added on top of that. But these nativists were Germans, Irish, and English, who opposed all these new immigrants coming in. Now, to be fair, there were still some Irish and Germans immigrating from Ireland and Germany at the time, but the vast majority were these new immigrants. And they said, whoa, buddy, you can't just come across the ocean and just come here and just take our jobs. Who do you think you are? Us? You don't have that right. And so, again, they're warning these new immigrants that they're not allowed, they shouldn't come and immigrate. Again, very anti-immigration. One of the major reasons why, folks, is, again, they're concerned about what? Jobs. One of the major reasons is jobs. But a second major reason, folks, is this idea of social Darwinism. This idea of social Darwinism. What's Darwinism? Survival of the fittest. Animals that are strongest survive, right? So what is social Darwinism? The strongest people survive. Close. This notion that the strongest race survives. And so social Darwinism was another element of this racism, the idea that these new immigrants, they were what? Weak or inferior. Whoa, whoa, whoa! This is a country of superior beings. If you want to come to America, you have to come from a good stock. A good race. And we don't want just Jews and Jews and Italians and Greeks and Russians. We don't want you here. You're not the kind of type of person that we want. Social Darwinism suggests that you're on the bottom. We want only the good type coming into our country. Does that make sense? And hey, look, you're poor because your race sucks. You think we want you in our country? That's the argument. The reason why all these people are poor is because you're of the wrong race. So hey, you know what? You don't like it, but it's science, man. It's science. So they made that argument. We don't want you coming into our country. So again, we talked about how we oppose them coming in. We're afraid of jobs. One group that's created in order to prevent immigration, maybe I have them here, is the American Protective Association. The American Protective Association. And the American Protective Association, again, was created to protect American jobs from immigrants. I want you guys all to take a moment, about 30 seconds, to look at this image. And then tell me what it suggests. Okay, who can raise their hand and tell me what this cartoon is suggesting? Anyone? Yeah, Antonio.
At one point, they were immigrants that were poor.
At one point, they too were immigrants that were poor. I mean, look at their nose. This is who they used to be. But now that they're wealthy, what are they doing? Yeah, they're shunning away these new immigrants. It's this sense of hypocrisy, right? Hey, you were just like me. Was like, yeah, but we're not anymore. You can't come into this country even though we came the exact same way. Does that make sense, folks? This sense of hypocrisy in American immigration happens time and time and time again. It's cyclical. So it's something to keep in mind that they were him like 40, 50 years ago. And now that they've made it big, they want to make sure the American dream is reserved for them and not for anyone else. We do the same, folks. Again, in the future, if again my parents were immigrants, and I imagine your parents were, many of them were also, in like 3, 4 generations, your kids were like, well, you can't just come into this country and take our jobs. Not like that's how I got here. It is how my great-great-grandparents got here. But that's different. I was born here legally. Why can't you be? Okay, so that sense of hypocrisy is still there. We forget our history. So, one really good example of them, again, trying to prevent immigrants from coming to America is the Chinese Exclusion Act. We've talked about this already, 1882. We talked about this way back when. Remember? It's by California, whatever else. So, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, that happened. That's one example. So again, here's a cartoon. Here we are, willing to educate everyone, but not you, Chinese. No, you are not allowed. Get out. Sorry. If you look at this sign, that's supposed to be a haciendero or a Mexican American now. His sign says, "Kick out the heathen, he's got no vote." But again, who are we welcoming? Indian Americans, I think that's a Swedish guy, Native Americans, Mexicans, blacks, Turks. I mean, we're accepting all these people, but you Chinese, get out. Anyway, let's talk about what's happening with black education at this time. So, there are changes in education at this time, specifically for black Americans. Because for the most part, many of them are still dealing with a lot of crap in the South, right? I mean, that hasn't changed very much, but there are improvements in education. They're led by 2 different people. The first person you should know is Booker T. Washington. Not to be confused with Booker T. the wrestler. Okay, very different people. Now, Booker T. Washington, he promoted black education, but specifically, he promoted black technical or vocational education. He promoted technical or vocational education. Okay, so he promoted technical or vocational education. So what is vocational or technical education? What are we teaching you in vocational education? Not a language. It's not even about public speaking. Technical or vocational education is teaching you a skill. Like if you take technical or vocational classes, I'm going to teach you to repair cars. I'm going to teach you to repair machines. I'm going to teach you to be a receptionist. But do you know how to do anything else? No. It's a very specific type of career. It's a very specific type of education. Versus if you just get high school education, what can you do after you graduate? Anything, because you learn science, math, history, whatever. Vocational education is very specific. You're going to go to school and learn to be an auto mechanic. You're going to go to school and learn how to make machines. Make sense so far? Okay. He believed that it was important to teach black Americans skills because he wanted black Americans to develop economic independence. He wanted black Americans to gain economic independence. Because if we can learn how to work, can we become our own bosses? We can work now. And he believed that if we could show that we were economically independent, that we didn't need you to tell us what to do, that we knew how to work, that economic independence might eventually lead to what? Yeah, this idea of political and social independence. Or rights, at least. I mean, the reason why maybe black Americans at this time are not afforded the same rights as whites is they don't know how much we can contribute. That's the argument that Booker T is making. But if they knew how well we could work, they would give us the rights that we want so badly. We just have to prove to them that we deserve it. So, he did not advocate for political rights. He did not advocate for social. He didn't ask for the right to vote. He didn't ask to make things equal. He said, we're going to have to prove to them that we deserve it. Does that make sense, folks? He's not demanding equality. He did not demand equality. He said, all we need to show them is that we can work. And if we can work, eventually, we're going to go ahead and gain that those rights and freedoms. Does that make sense, though, folks? So he made this argument. Oh, by the way, he was in charge of a school called the Tuskegee Institute. And again, this was a vocational school. It's like ITT Tech or DeVry. If you go to DeVry, can you become whatever you want to be when you graduate? No, you go to DeVry to be like a criminal lab specialist. But if you can't find a job as a criminal lab specialist, is it going to be difficult for you to find any other job? Yeah, because you learn to do just that one thing. So that's why going to vocational school is a little bit difficult. Like we have ROP class. We used to have like floral classes here at school. Let's say you became a florist. Can you take that florist background and, I don't know, become a banker? No. Probably not. You just have to do the accounting, whatever else. You learn how to make flowers and arrangements. Anyway, Booker T. Washington made his argument, or he made his argument in what became known as the Atlanta Compromise. So the speech that Booker T. Washington made is called the Atlanta Compromise. You don't have to write this down, just know the name of the speech. He made his argument in the Atlanta Compromise, and let me tell you what it said. And here's pretty much the gist of it, and then we'll read through it together. What the Atlanta Compromise said was that blacks had to accept white political rule. Blacks had to accept white rule. So that's just the way the world works. We have to accept white rule. And they also had to accept segregation. So that's not what you want to hear, is it? But that's what he was saying at the time. Look, I know you don't like it, but we have to accept white rule and segregation. Until we can prove. So we have to accept white rule and segregation until we can prove our worth. Until we can prove our worth. So let me read what he wrote here. He said, our greatest danger is that in the great leap from slavery to freedom, we may overlook the fact that the masses of us are to live by the production of our hands, and fail to keep in mind that we shall prosper in proportion as we learn to dignify and glorify common labor and put brains and skill into the common occupations of life. So first off, he's saying, look, many of us have to work with our hands. And if we don't learn how to do that well, then we're going to be stuck, going back to the way things were. We shall prosper in proportion as we learn to draw the line between the superficial and the substantial, the ornamental gewgaws of life and the useful. Look, you guys can talk about equality and justice, but will equality and justice put food on the table? That's superficial. What we should be talking about is substantial. substantial, the useful. Learning a trade, that is useful. It's not about equality, it's not about social justice, it's about putting food on the table. It's about proving our worth. No race can prosper till it learns that there is as much dignity in tilling a field as in writing a poem. It is at the bottom of life we must begin, and not at the top. Nor should we permit our grievances to overshadow our opportunities. He said, look, we don't all have to be doctors and writers tomorrow. We have to start where we were and build our way up. Make sense? He has a point, but the problem is, if all we ever do is learn to work machines and not promote people to go to college, are black Americans ever going to be bosses and managers and business owners? No, they're constantly just going to be the workers. So he does have a point, and you know what? You're right. We do have to make sure that we have to work. But the problem is, Booker T. Washington, what you're suggesting is that everyone should do this. And that for those of us that want to be doctors or lawyers or business leaders, you're suggesting that we're betraying our race, that we're not focusing on what's important. But if we do what you say, then we're always going to be workers. We're never going to be leaders. We're never going to be managers. Make sense? So the other person that you should know that disagreed with Booker T. Washington, and these two butted heads all the time, was W.E.B. Du Bois. Webb Du Bois. And Webb Du Bois was very different from Booker T. Washington. One example of why Webb Du Bois was different. Webb Du Bois was the first black to graduate from Harvard. So, different? I would say so. He wasn't a vocational, advocate. He promoted that all blacks should go to college. He didn't like Booker T. Washington because he said that Booker T's plan would mean that blacks would remain economically inferior. He said that Booker T's plan would make blacks economically inferior. Why? Vanessa?
They would stay like that?
Yeah, they would only have those types of jobs. They're not going to be able to go to college and become lawyers and doctors. Said, look, according to Booker T's plan, we should just keep things the way they are, maybe with a little bit of improvement. But then we're always going to be manual labor. We'll never be the bosses. So instead, he had a different plan. He demanded complete equality. Political, economic, and social. What did Booker T want? Just what? What did Booker T want?
Social.
No. Booker T only wanted economic equality. What Webb Du Bois is asking for is all of it. No, I'm not going to wait. Why do we have to prove what we're worth when in this country we were already all made equal? There's nothing to prove. We deserve this today. I don't have to prove anything to you. We deserve the right to vote because we're men just like you. Does that make sense? That's his argument. And not only does he demand complete equality, he also demands that all should go to college. And one group that was going to help everyone go to college was an organization called the NAACP. Anyone know what the NAACP stands for? Still exists today. Still offers scholarships all over the place. You all can apply for scholarships.
National African American something.
No.
It doesn't say African, actually. No. It's National Association. So, It stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It still exists today. They offer tons of scholarships every year. I highly recommend you guys apply for them next year. It's not just for blacks. Anyone can apply for them. They're good scholarships, too, if you can get them. Now, most blacks get the scholarships, but, I mean, you can also apply. And you can still win them. I mean, they're not just because for colored people. Last time I checked, white is also a color, as are other colors. Brown is also a color. Anyway, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, their goal is to do what, folks? To get them into college. And specifically, there was this idea of the talented 10. He said that the top 10% of all races should go to college. That the top 10% of all races should go to college. He said, look, you may look upon the black population and think that they're dumb because they're not educated, but that's systemic, man. Tons of us were slaves before. But I guarantee you that the top 10% of blacks are just as intelligent as the top 10% of whites. That's the argument he was making. Saying that the talented 10th should all go to college. Of all races. The top 10%, the talented 10th, should all go to college. Because it's not just for them, but they will contribute to society. Why not give them that opportunity? Wouldn't we all benefit from that? Look at George Washington Carver. He made like peanuts and like soybeans and vinegar and tons of stuff. Great. Anyway, so that's the argument that he made. His argument was made in something known as the Niagara Movement speech. So just like the Atlanta Compromise, which was a speech made by Booker T, Webb Du Bois, he made the Niagara Movement speech. Again, demanding immediate equality and education. He demanded immediate equality and education. His speech went something like, we will not be satisfied to take one jot or tittle less than our full manhood rights. We claim for ourselves every single right that belongs to a freeborn American, political, civil, and social. And until we get these rights, we will never cease to protest and assail the ears of America. The battle we wage is not for ourselves alone, but for all true Americans. It is a fight for ideals, lest this, our common fatherland, falls to its founding, become in truth the land of the thief and home of the slave, a byword and a hissing among the nations for its sounding pretensions and pitiful accomplishments. I'm saying, until we get this, we will not stand down, because remember how this is supposed to be the land of the free and home of the brave? We don't live in that world. We live in the land of the thief and the home of the slave. Powerful words from Webb Du Bois. Anyway, let's talk about newspaper and literature. How are other things changing in society at the time? Well, newspaper and literature are being promoted by William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. These two individuals are one of the most powerful men in newspapers. Hearst and Pulitzer. You know, if you write a really good article, you win the Pulitzer Prize. So two very, very powerful men. They made their money again writing newspapers. And the way they wrote their newspapers was in a form known as sensationalism or yellow journalism. Sensationalism or yellow journalism. That's a style of newspapers that they sold. Sensationalism or yellow journalism. And pretty much the basic idea behind sensationalism or yellow journalism was extreme exaggeration. Really extreme exaggeration. or they're exaggerated news stories. I'll give you an example. Let's say that a dam that holds back water burst in a city, and like it flooded like 1 foot, and like 3 people went to the hospital. Okay, so that news article at the LA Times might be dam breaks, flooding city, 3 injured, right? In a William Randolph Hearst or Joseph Pulitzer newspaper, that might read as Armageddon comes to America. Make sense? Or let's say it's a rainstorm coming in, like the weather is going to be really bad next week, so it's going to be weather forecast predicts rain. Okay, that would be like an LA Times article. A sensationalized or yellow journalist article might be God's wrath to come upon California. Does that make sense? That's sensationalist journalism, because you think, oh my God, really? And you read it, like, oh, well, no, it's just rain. But would that headline attract you?
Yeah.
And so the whole point of yellow journalism or sensationalism was to sell newspapers. That was the whole point, just to sell newspapers. You guys go to checkout at the grocery store, you read these headlines all the time, right? Like, is Britney Spears murdering her babies? You're like, oh my gosh, I have to buy this magazine to find out. And you buy it, and you open it, and it says, no. Oh. Well, the headline led me to believe that that's what was happening.
So you read what you're reading tonight.
That's why you read it online, so you don't buy it. But in any case, the idea of yellow journalism or sensationalism is, again, to sell newspapers. Does that make sense? Now, the fact that we're selling newspapers suggests what? Yeah, people can read, increase literacy, all that stuff. Here's a few other examples. Abraham Lincoln was a woman? Shocking pics found in White House basement. Plus, was John Wilkes Booth her jilted lover? No, obviously not. Yeah, these are obviously fake pictures. But again, wouldn't you buy that magazine? Like, oh my gosh, really? They're like, no, none of this is true at all. This is recently. Just 2002. But again, other examples. Great sea victory for America. Vengeance for the Maine began. Spain's Asiatic fleet burned and sunk. Not accident on the seas, which would have been more appropriate of a title for this. But does that make sense, folks? Exaggerated headlines. Anyway, women. What's happening with women? Well, big changes for women. Women are now going to have more rights, including the right to what? Divorce. Women will now have more rights to divorce, especially when they're unhappy. Remember before when women couldn't get divorced, even if they were unhappy? Only men could give them a divorce. Now, women can have divorces for unhappiness. Which is good, if you think about it, because men, like, hey, you're unhappy, I don't care. You're still going to make me that sandwich, and I'm not going to let you get divorced. But now, can women get divorced? You make your own sandwich, I'm leaving. Okay? Change. Women can get divorces for cruelty and abandonment also. Remember how Rachel Jackson, she tried to divorce her husband, but she couldn't, until she married Andrew Jackson anyway? Well, now women can also get divorced for cruelty and abandonment. So if your husband leaves you, you can't just have to stay married. You can now get a divorce as well. They can get divorced for any reason. Like, I lost a coin toss. Divorced. Other changes for women. Because of immigrants and moving into the cities, women choose to have fewer children. Why might women want to have fewer children? They can't feed them. In the city, children become a liability, right? You have to feed someone. And so, new changes. Birth rate drops. Women have fewer kids. You have fewer marriages. Or marriages decline, which means you have a lot more single women. Why might marriages decline? Yeah, they want to do it the way you have less divorce, but also this idea of you just don't want to have kids. And you also have increased use of what? Birth control, good. Something to note, though, is it would be smarter for you to get married, though. Why?
So if something happens, we get married. Yes.
Well, just think financially, you guys can help each other out. So you're actually better off having a dual income back then versus, today, you're still better off having two incomes versus just the one. Because if something does happen, you saw someone that might be able to provide for some of you. NASA is back. The National American Women's Suffrage Association. So just write NASA. NASA reemerges with a new leader. The new leader of NASA will be Carrie Chapman Catt. CCC. Carrie Chapman Catt. She will again advocate that women what? What was she asking for? Equal rights and the right to vote, women's suffrage. So Carrie Chapman Catt is a new leader of the NAWSA. So Carrie Chapman Catt. Other successes. In 1890, Wyoming will be the first state to let women vote. Now, can they vote in presidential elections? No, because that's a federal law. But in states, like for governor and local matters, Wyoming will be the first state to give women the right to vote. And Wyoming is a state where?
In the middle.
In the west, right? And in that western Midwest area. So why might they give women the right to vote before, like, the eastern states?
Because we're not that industrialized.
It's not if industrialization. If you're living out west, folks, who has to work?
Everybody.
Everyone. Are women going to be equal to men in terms of survival? Yeah, so if you look out west, women are going to be a lot more equal to men because they both need to work to survive. So Wyoming is not a surprising choice for the first state. Also, one awesome campaign, by the way. Women bring all voters into the world. Let women vote. That's undeniable, folks. Women bring all voters into the world. How do you deny that?
I know.
That's not true. So yeah, hey, you wouldn't have voted if it wasn't for me. Not me, but if I was a woman. So that's a pretty big deal. So again, women are still fighting for their right to vote. Are they going to get it yet? No, but they're fighting for it. So is there progress for women? Now, the one backstep is that they didn't allow women into NASA. And so they did create the National Association of Colored Women, led by this woman, Ida B. Wells. Yes, Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells. Oh, nuts. There's also Ida Tarbell, so. Ida B. Wells. She was, again, National Association of Colored Women. They also fought for black women's suffrage. It's kind of like Sojourner Truth in the 1840s, right? Like how she's fighting for black rights. Now, these women are fighting for their own right to vote. Because women were fighting for their right to vote, and then black women were trying to fight for their right to vote as well. So, difference. In Wyoming, only white women were allowed to vote. There just weren't very many black women in that area anyway. So. Questions, comments? Okay, so National Association of Colored Women. Other movements emerging at this time. You know them already. Let's just bring them back up. Temperance and Prohibition. They want it to happen again. What's temperance?
Slowly get rid of the alcohol.
Yeah, this is all about banning alcohol again. So this movement continues. And in the 1890s, they're still trying to ban alcohol, temperance and prohibition. You have the National Prohibition Party and the Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU. They also want to ban alcohol. So just know them for now. Other folks that want to ban alcohol? You guys understand this part, right? Just want to get rid of alcohol. Just groups. Other groups that want to ban alcohol include... You guys ready? Carrie A. Nation. She's crazy. She was known as she was among the Hatchetonians, where they would go into bars and just mess things up with hatchets. Very violent. But they would go into bars with hatchets and just like destroy all the casks of alcohol and just like go crazy. They wouldn't like murder anyone, but they went nuts. And like, who's gonna beat up an old woman? So like Carrie A. Nation, by the way, her name, Carrie A. Nation. I know. Hatchetonians, they'd go around and just bust up bars. And also the Anti-Saloon League. Saloons is just the what? It's a bar. So Carrie A. Nation, the Hatchetonians, and the Anti-Saloon League, here they are, destroying alcohol. Everyone's so sad. They're like, oh. Good. Last thing you should know is for leisure and entertainment, what do we do for fun? Vaudeville. What's vaudeville? Anyone know? No, vaudeville's like a variety show. Think like Saturday Night Live. They have like, magicians, like jugglers. Other people like, come on down and see the bearded woman. And they'll play like ragtime music. Minstrel shows were crazy racist. Minstrel shows were white people in blackface singing black songs as entertainment. Super racist. And minstrel shows. They would travel and sing black songs, and they're white people in blackface. Don't do that. It's not appropriate, ever. Good with that? And of course, bicycles. People will start getting around on bicycles now.
I always think of that when I see them.
Some of my favorites. This one here. There's no pedals. You're just kind of like walking, but you're sitting down while you're walking. So you're kind of like striding more than anything. You're like, whee!
Giant wheelchair.
This one is a giant wheelchair-ish thing where you're sitting up, but you're like moving with your wheels.
I like that one.
And then, of course, your standard bicycle. By the way, bicycles back then, velocipedes. A velocipede. Bicycles actually were pretty impressive, though, because they got people around pretty quickly. So, I would say so. By 1883, folks, Americans had 1 million bikes. So a lot of people were biking by 1883. Okay, that ends part 3. On Tuesday, Wednesday, we will end this unit with part 4 and the Great American West. Have a good day, folks. I'll see you later.